So with the rise of right-wing radio and the rise of Fox News, you had Republican, I'll call them entertainers because a lot of them were journalists, but they were in essence saying, hey, look, negotiating with the Democrats is negotiating with an enemy of the United States. Donald Trump. The fact that I love these black women that are in my life dictated the fact that I could not vote for Donald Trump. And not only could I not vote for him, I had to show up and vote for Kamala Harris. Now, I understand the fact that there are many black men who feel alienated for many reasons. And I also understand that we don't live in a society that has reached equality or equity. And that's true. However, you can't throw your vote away at this crucial moment to one who not only doesn't care about equality and equity, but will fight equality and equity. When you fight diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're fighting my ability to work in whatever job I want to work in, even though whether I'm prepared or not. And I'm prepared. And everybody I know is prepared. And so that's my point on Donald Trump and why we should vote. Maybe Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's a great responsibility. My family's from small towns, Louisiana. And so like in many of those small towns, there was like intimidation or whatever was used to keep people from voting was used. And so my, grandparents were, late in life, once they gained that, right to vote, even though it was a right, it wasn't really, it was like a risk. They had to risk their lives to vote. So many chose not to. And so, yeah, I think any almost like threat against that right is obviously very bad. But I also think, to Dube's point, is that as black men, we have a responsibility to understand what the issues are, understand what's at stake. And yeah, I have a black mother, daughter, wife, and so sisters. And so, yeah, it's up to us to step up and exercise that right, that our ancestors, our parents, grandparents were, that was a life-threatening action. Yeah, so
Let me ask you both a question. So you point out the historical facts. So now, how do we go for having a large percentage, like 90%, going to vote, and even in some of the rural areas, even putting their life on the line, to 22%? What's the disconnect in our culture?
Well, part of it is what happened in the 80s. Okay, so in the 80s, we started, so it started in the late 60s. So what happened in the late 60s was Nixon became president, right? And the beginning of Nixon's presidency, the manufacturing jobs moved from the inner city out to the suburbs. So you had black men with families who could no longer provide for their families financially. Right after that, we had Nixon announce his war on drugs. The war on drugs was beginning of when we started locking black men up in jail for drug abuse, either selling it, using it, whatever. So then you have a whole generation, in particular Generation X, which is being raised with no father in the home. And then Reagan came with the differentiation between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Powder cocaine, you get a slap on the wrist. Crack cocaine, you're gonna go to jail for a number of years. Clinton signed the crime bill, which was a big mistake, because the crime bill said 3 strikes and you're out. Right? And some states actually had 2 strikes and you're out.
Is that a federal thing?
That was a federal thing. Okay. And then statewide, I think in Georgia, you had 2 strikes and you're out. before the 3 strikes and you're out. So all of a sudden you're locking up black men who are 25 years to life for simple drug offenses. So you have a whole generation of black children being raised without a father in the home, and many times without a mother in the home too. So so many of them were raising themselves, or they had a mother in the home who had to work to feed the whole family. So that limits the time in which you're going to have to interact with your parent.
Right.
So what that does is it creates a sense of
all that stuff was done on purpose for this. Is that right?
I think it was done on purpose.
For to stop the voting?
Well,
No, I think it was to stop.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was some sinister plan. Well, yeah, I don't think
it was Clinton's sinister plan.
I just don't think. I think that culture kind of moves in a certain direction and shifts in a certain direction, and so like in urban areas, in rural areas, like people move from Alabama or Mississippi to Chicago looking for work, and they get there, and so that's their circumstance, and it was unfair.
Let's look at this. Why did jobs leave the inner city and go to the suburbs first before they moved overseas?
Yeah, well, that was
Yeah.
So yes, but
so that's more of a.
I don't think it was some mass
sinister.
sinister like.
No, I think it was a racial thing. Now I think what happened in the 90s was this. I think part of the reason for that crime bill was you were looking at Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, you were looking at the news, and everybody's talking about the war between the Crips and the Bloods, gang wars. Everybody's talking about all this is over crack cocaine. And so I think then, because remember the Black Caucus supported the crime bill. It wasn't, so that one I think was more a response to, and also the public at the time was more center right than it is now.
Yeah, it was a Clinton.
Yeah, so I think
right,
the Democrats were trying to seek, they were like, hey, we can't seem like we're soft on crime, because that's kind of how Dukakis lost in 1988. So there was always a fear of that. And so they were like, we have to appear that we're tough on crime. But regardless of the reason, you had a number of black men locked up for nonviolent offenses. And it had a devastating impact on our community. And so now, and the other thing too is, at the end of the day, you've really only, if you look at going back to 1900, right? You've only had maybe 4 presidents that were significant. You had transactional presidents, and then you had presidents that were truly significant. So if you look at Franklin Roosevelt was one. Teddy Roosevelt was the first one in the early 1900s because he broke up the Standard Oil. Franklin Roosevelt, consequential. Lyndon Johnson, consequential. Ronald Reagan, consequential. Right? So these are all the presidents who set policy that were being debated for the next 40, 50 years. So right now we're on Reagan's turf still. I think Biden would have been consequential had Kamala won, but she didn't. And so Trump's gonna, try to, a lot of the stuff that Biden did, I think Trump's gonna work to, he's gonna work to undermine or overturn completely. But those are really the only consequential presidents we've had. You could maybe throw Obama in there because he had health care and he's the first black president. Though I will argue that Obama could have been much more consequential. Yeah, and he taken more advantage. And I get where Obama was coming from. He's the first black president, so he didn't.
Yeah, but I think also
he didn't want to move too.
He played fast chess with, McConnell, and I think.
Well, before McConnell, the first 2 years he was the president. He had the Senate and the House.
Yeah,
and he had a veto-proof majority in the Senate.
So you saying he wasn't aggressive enough?
Well, I think he could have been more aggressive. Now that doesn't take away from the fact that I think Obama was a very good president.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. But could he, and hindsight's always, hindsight's obviously undefeated. I think the problem was, I think Obama looked at politics And a lot of Democrats make this mistake, right? As where we were in the 80s. You know, in the 80s, you could go in.
Good faith politics.
Right, good faith politics. You know, we'll debate on the Senate floor and the House floor, and then we'll make a deal, you know, after, when you know, we'll go out to dinner and make a deal, right? The thing that happened was you had the rise of right-wing radio, and then you had Fox News, which came in the mid to late 90s. So with the rise of right-wing radio and the rise of Fox News, you had Republican, you know, I'll call them entertainers because a lot of them were journalists, but they were in essence saying, hey, look, you know, negotiating with the Democrats is negotiating with an enemy of the United States. It wasn't just that we disagreed on policy, which is what it historically been. I mean, I can disagree with you on policy, and that doesn't mean you're my enemy, because it's policy. And then we find the middle ground. Well, what Rush Limbaugh and them were telling them was, if you even debate with them and come to a middle ground, you have just negotiated with an un-American character. And that's a problem. And that's part of how we've gotten here.
So just to recap, all those events that happened from the 70s or to the 90s is why the black turnout to vote has come the way it is now.
Well, it's a couple of things. It's that, but it's also, you know, a lack of understanding history. You know,
a lack of understanding or not knowing. Because everything
not knowing
right now,
not knowing
all
history.
This stuff I didn't never even knew about.
Yes, it's not knowing history.
But I didn't know that Martin Luther King was friends with Nixon.
Yes.
And the rural South was, I mean, the South was.
In fact, Nixon was at King's funeral in '68.
But it's also the concept that all politics is local. So like your city councilman election, commissioner, mayor, whatever, judge, those count also. For instance, like the state-run, like the state government, that's who's, driving the actual maps and everything else in terms of the districts and stuff. And so as you get different leadership, that's going to drive, how many districts you'll have in Texas or in Georgia or whatever. And so it's important that even like a state senator or a state, representative, those like votes matter, those like elections matter. And so, to me, we almost have to get into like a practice of taking every like election seriously. And so then once we get to the every 4-year big one, we're already used to, having people come out and, having black males, black men engaged, and just knowing how critical each race is. And so we have to start from scratch, asking people, are they registered? Asking people, what do you know about policy? And,
Well, let me ask you, what about entertainment? I think entertainment's been a problem.